Hello, and thanks for joining me this week. I've got something really interesting to talk about today, especially as it's getting a lot hotter all across Australia. And it's time to start considering about air conditioning and more precisely, split level systems. You know, those things that are on your wall that you might not have turned on for quite a while. Certainly down here in Melbourne, we turn ours on and use them for heating and cooling, but in towards Queensland, you might just use them for air conditioning. I've got a very special guest on today. I'm going to be presenting an interview where I talk to him all about this topic of how best to clean your split system, because this is a very real source of biological contamination. And I want to lead into tell you a little bit of a story about an inspection I did a couple of years ago. I had a client call me up on the phone and she was very, very, very upset about how her skin was appearing. And obviously over the phone, I was listening to her. I asked her a little bit about where she lived, and she told me that she lived in a new apartment here in Paran, and that she started to feel unwell with asthma type symptoms, but her main problem was a severe skin irritation problem. And when I got there, really, it was a tiny little studio apartment for that she and her partner lived in. And there certainly was an odor. And when the wall-mounted inverter, when I looked at that, it looked like this. I could immediately see mold inside the unit on the wall. And I thought I better take some swab samples of this and some tape lift samples. And this is what the type of symptomology she was experiencing. And this story was actually covered in the news, but she was my former client and she had a severe skin irritation, which she claimed was caused by the abnormal, unhealthy air inside her apartment. And certainly she had a severe dermal skin reaction to that, and the mold levels which we measured, or I measured, inside the apartment were really astronomically high in comparison to the normal outdoor reference control. And we used a combination of viable air sampling, non-viable spore traps, and tape lifts and swabs from inside the air conditioner. And really, I'm really glad I did that test, because when I was doing the data collection, it was such a small studio. The air conditioning unit was on, but I hadn't really planned on sampling it. But I'm sure glad I did sample it, because she wasn't sure. She hadn't connected the dots with the inverter yet either. She thought that maybe there was some mysterious reservoir of mold in her apartment, and the purpose of my inspection was to find that mysterious source of mold. And again, the surface sampling results confirmed that it was in fact the inverter, the wall-mounted split system, which was projecting out or emitting all of this contaminated air and recirculating it throughout it. So today I want to talk to you about Brian from a company called Organic Aircon Cleaning in Queensland. And this is a typical view from inside one of his inverters, and look at it afterwards. And I think that this is quite remarkable, because this is the level of clean which you need to achieve if you want to eliminate your split system as being a source of contamination and spreading that throughout your home or apartment. And his method applies not just to domestic environments, but also commercial and industrial environments as well. So the whole point of today's live stream is to really demonstrate those practical methods that you can use and hear from an expert on how to clean these split systems. So we are going to move soon towards beginning this interview. In the show notes, I'm going to put all the details for Brian. He works on the Gold Coast and south of Brisbane, and this is his telephone number and his website links here. Again, I'm going to be providing them at the end, so you'll be able to contact him, and I urge you to make contact if you've got any questions which are not covered in this live stream. And just before we start this, I want to state that certainly in hospitals, the correlation or connection with unhealthy air is really a hot topic of research, and there is a lot of information out there on PubMed making the connection between unhealthy air and contaminated HVAC systems being responsible for the spread of what are called nosocomial infections. And this is particularly serious when people are having day surgery or more invasive surgical procedures. If the air that is being circulated and introduced into those day surgeries or operating theatres is not clean, the potential to introduce infections increases. And this is the same problem which is going on in our homes and offices, and this is really the whole point of today's interview. I'm going to play this for you now, and we'll get going. I've got Brian on the line from Organic Aircon Cleaning, and I'm very excited to talk with him and interview him this morning because he's an expert at how best to clean your split system. And with summer around the corner, this is a really important topic. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Cameron. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm going really well. I know that there's an hour difference between Melbourne and Queensland, so thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. So, listen, my first question, because I'm going to be posting all the links to your social media, your Instagram and your Facebook account, and obviously to your website. I must say that you've got some fantastic examples of before and after cleaning of split systems. And obviously on this show, we're interested in the topic of mould, and you appear to be an Australian expert on cleaning these units. Could you tell me a little bit about the work that you do?
Okay, so I specialise in wall-mounted split systems, but I use organic products, so I don't use chemicals. These organic products, they basically break down the mould and bacteria, everything else that's in air conditioners, because it's not only mould that grows in air conditioners. The whole time air conditioners are running, they're sucking in everything that's floating around in the environment, and it gets sucked into the unit, mixes with the condensation, and yeah, it creates an awful, awful mess. But the biggest problem is mould. So it's inevitable that air conditioners grow mould because the whole time the air conditioners are cooling the air during the heat transfer process, it creates condensation. And it's especially a big problem in Queensland, the humid, hot weather. So when you use your air conditioner on cooling mode, it's creating all this condensation. When you switch off the air conditioner, it closes up and it sits there with all this moisture inside the head unit. And then it doesn't take long for the humid weather, the hot weather to hit that condensation. And that's basically all you need to grow mold is 20 degrees plus temperatures, condensation, no airflow to dry it out, and boom, yeah, just dries in air conditioners. So it's a very, very big problem that not a lot of people know. And big part of my job is trying to educate people, trying to make people aware that, yeah, how dirty and how harmful like the mold in air conditioners can be for your health, and they need to be cleaned, thoroughly cleaned every 12 months to remove that mold.
That's a really important point that you've mentioned, that people need to clean their wall-mounted inverters every 12 months. Certainly, I looked at mine yesterday and this morning, and, you know, it hasn't been on since last summer. And it was particularly warm in the last couple of days of the Spring Racing Carnival down here. And although it's a bit cold this morning, but nevertheless, the thing is that it hasn't been on for months. So I don't know what's going on in there. And, you know, I think what you're talking about is something I see all the time with this issue of sick building syndrome, in that many homeowners and occupants are particularly fastidious about keeping the home clean. But what about these things that sit on your wall? And, this is what I really want to flag for the listeners and people who are watching this live stream, because it's a really important topic. So I think that's great. How did you actually get into this?
Actually, that's a bit of a funny story. Quite a few years ago, I was out of work. I was looking for work, and I'm quite technical. I've always been very good with my hands and technical, mechanical, and fixing things, pulling things apart. Yeah, and I've seen this job advertised for cleaning air conditioners. At this time, I had no idea whatsoever, like most people don't. I did not know how dirty air conditioners can get. And I applied for the job. I got the job. I stuck with them for a few years. I learned all the ins and outs of how to clean the air conditioners properly, just everything to do with cleaning the air conditioners. I did all the sort of research on mould and bacteria and all the other things. I did that in my own time. But, yeah, so I took all of that. The reason I started this business is because I'm not into naming companies or saying anything bad, but they use a product which I was having even health reactions to, and another guy I was working with was having the same issues. And I thought, well, I was getting skin eczema and stuff on my hands, and I thought, if this is doing this to my skin, what's it going to be doing in the air conditioners? So I started the business with organics, did a bit of research. No one in Australia is using organic products to clean air conditioners when they should. The last place you want to put chemicals is in an air conditioner, because it's just going to blow straight back out into the air that you're breathing. And it just does not make sense to fix one problem by removing mould and germs out of an air conditioner just to replace it with another substance which is just as bad for your health. So, yeah, that's how I got into it. And since then, I'm always continually looking for ways to improve my services to my customers, trying to gain more knowledge so I can pass on to my customers, educate them, what they need to do, what they need to look out for, a couple of simple steps that people can do. So if people, if someone's moving into a home, like a rental property or even a house they're buying, if they've got used air conditioners in the house, do not rush in and switch them on straight away, because I get many customers coming to me. They're worried about switching their air cons on. They don't know what's in there. And I get there, take it apart, and it's most of the time, full of mould and all sorts of other stuff which you don't want your family to be exposed to. So my best advice, find your local aircon cleaning service provider. See what they offer. On the Gold Coast, I'm based on the Gold Coast, and I offer free inspections. So I go out, do a free inspection at no cost whatsoever. If I find visible mould or any contamination in there, I will recommend getting it cleaned. I'm looking to incorporate a bacteria and mould test to, even if there's nothing visible, so we can pick up anything that's invisible, because a lot of harmful things you just can't see with the naked eye. So I'm looking at incorporating that into the service.
Brian, that is fantastic. You raised so many points there. I've just got to jump in and sort of summarize some of these. I think that what you're focusing on about using organic-based sanitizers and disinfectants is a really important point. Certainly, with a lot of the research literature, it is looking at incorporating these enzymatic cleaners and in a sense, biologically based enzymes that can, in many cases, break down biofilms more effectively than a pure chemical can. And I think that you're correct that the correlation between chemical exposure and skin reactions and allergy is certainly very plausible. And I've certainly anecdotally heard of this and seen it firsthand. Certainly you can smell it immediately when a contaminated split system has been theoretically cleaned. I certainly see this all too often in post-remediation verifications of severely water-damaged properties where insurers have appointed contractors who, unbeknownst to the insurer, have gone ahead and done something with compound X, Y, or Z, and the end result is a home that frankly stinks if the unit's put on. So that's a big problem. So I certainly applaud you for incorporating organic-based disinfectants in your work. I think that the next point that you raise with regard to educating the public is absolutely fundamental. And these tips that you've mentioned about if people move into a property that hasn't been used for a while or they suspect that there's a problem, well, talk to an expert, because it's a reality that if it is contaminated, this increasing on-off cycling of cool air will result in condensation, and the natural microorganisms that are present in the air will then grow on that. And in terms of the research that you're talking about, this is not just an Australian problem, it's a worldwide problem. In hospital settings, for example, the connection between the HVAC system and surgical site infections is suggested to be 13 to 17% due to poor indoor air quality brought about by the dirtiness or lack of cleanliness in the HVAC system. And certainly in healthcare, there's increasing stringency in terms of HEPA filters, which many of these wall-mounted inverters just simply can't have in front of the airstream. So you're talking about domestic units, which are breeding grounds for microbes. Now, what's, say, one of the worst examples of split system mold that you've encountered?
They're all pretty much the same. Like, if I get returning customers every 12 months, they're not so bad. They still grow mold, but I like to see cleaning air conditioners is meant to be a preventative maintenance. It's not meant to be, you see the mold, then clean it, because you've already been breathing it in and exposed to it for quite a while before we clean it. But the worst case I've seen, it's funny you mentioned that. Yesterday I was at a customer's house and I took apart this air conditioner and it was absolutely riddled with black mold. And I was having a talk with her about it, and she said the air conditioner was only 1 year old.
Wow.
And I've never seen an air conditioner so moldy at being only 1 year old. And see, a lot of factors need to be considered with air conditioners and how dirty they get. Depending on the local area, depending on the weather, how humid it is, depending where the air conditioner is mounted. If it's mounted on a wall that gets lots of heat from the sun on the outside, obviously there's going to be lots of heat, or the air conditioner is going to be exposed to lots of heat, especially when it closes up and it's got the condensation sitting in there. It's going to be heated up from that wall, from the sun, and mold's just going to start growing straight away. But yeah, so I can't say that that's probably the worst I've seen, because only a year, and it was, I can't even explain how bad it was. But yeah, 9 out of 10 air conditioners I come across are full of black mold. Yeah, just disgusting.
Yeah, wow. Look, I guess certainly maybe 7 or 8 years ago, someone asked me to start testing a couple of wall-mounted inverters at an aged care facility. And certainly we went in with swabs and tape lifts and that sort of thing. And bang, it's absolutely instant when you look at these tape lifts under the microscope that you can find a predominance of, allergy-causing spores like cladosporium and penicillium and aspergillus. These are probably what you're referring to. They certainly appear like those typical molds that we encounter in the environment when it gets damp, certainly from your photos. But, I've had a lot of people say, look, I wipe the fins with a microfiber cloth. What do you think about when people make suggestions like that, the do-it-yourselfers?
I do get customers that come to me and they've tried cleaning the unit themselves, and it's another part of my education to try and let people know. A lot of people are skeptical about cleaning their air conditioners. I'm not sure why. I think because they're not told that from the people that sell it to them, or it's just not common knowledge, they think it doesn't need to be done. But you cannot, unless you have the right equipment, you cannot thoroughly clean the inside of a split system air conditioner to remove all contaminants. You need the skills, experience, you need the right equipment. And I've got on my website and on my Facebook, I've got photos of the setup that I use. I've got this specially designed bag which attaches to the head unit. It hangs underneath the head unit. It's connected to a hose, connected to an enclosed container. And what I do, I spray the whole internal of the unit with my organic products. I let that sit for a while and do its thing. It's breaking down and doing what it does. While that's doing that, I take all the covers, and the filters outside. I thoroughly sterilize and clean them. By the time I come back inside, I've got a low pressure water sprayer. You can't use anything that's too high pressure because it will damage the fins in the air conditioner, but you need something that's got enough pressure to be able to clean thoroughly. So I did a lot of research and looking around and found the perfect size water pump. I actually built the machine myself, so I took my knowledge, skills and experience, and I built exactly what I need to do the job that I need to do. But without all this equipment, it's impossible to clean, to thoroughly clean the air conditioners properly. Just wiping the fins, just wiping where you can see doesn't do anything. You have to take the unit apart, you need a professional to take the unit apart. You need to get into all the areas that you can't see. That's the most important part because, like anything, if you only clean what you can see, you're still exposed to the stuff you can't see.
Yeah, that sounds very complicated and complex, but as you would expect it to be for a professional job as opposed to a do-it-yourself quick fix. Now, I've got to ask you one question. Water and electricity don't really mix. How do you protect yourself so you don't electrocute yourself?
Yeah, so we isolate. So we're not qualified electricians because we don't do any electrical work, but we can isolate the electrical switch, usually inside the electrical board of the house. We've got a lock to lock it out. That cuts all power going to the head unit, so there's no live electricity at all while we're doing our job. Also, within the head unit, the electrical section is isolated separate from like the coils, the fan, and the air well, the parts that we clean. And basically, after I isolate the electricity from the head unit, I cover up the electricals. Most of the time, they've got their own plastic covers, but I always, just as a precaution, so no water gets into the circuitry or the electricals, I cover up with a plastic. I've got this plastic thing that I put over the electrical compartment, and then I put a towel over the top as well, just to double insulate it to make sure no moisture gets in there to cause any issues.
Yeah, right. Now, listen, it sounds really fantastic and safe from your perspective. I guess the next question about safety is how do you minimize your own exposure to mold? Do you wear any masks?
Oh, yes, definitely have to, yes. So I wear gloves as well, plastic gloves to protect any skin contact with mold and whatever else is in the air conditioners. I also wear a specific face mask, a filtered face mask, which is, I can't remember the rating for it, but it's for...
It's probably a P2 or a P3.
I think it's a P2, yes, for mists and stuff like that, and pesticides and whatnot. So it's got a filter to protect from those fine things from getting in.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And look, I guess the next thing, because I want to move on to a question about real estate agents and property managers and landlords. But before I ask you that, is there a connection between the unit size and mold problems? As in, if people put undersized units into a large open plan living area, for example, and it cranks all the time, have you found any sort of connection or correlation between unit type or size and mold problems?
No, personally, I haven't. The only issue I've come across with that is people that use, because the more you use air conditioners, the more condensation it's making the entire time it's cooling. And I've come across very small bedroom units, because bedroom units are used a lot more than lounge room units. Obviously, they can be used during the day, then when people are sleeping at night, they use them too. So I find a lot of bedroom units, and they're a lot smaller than the lounge room ones, I find that they're usually always mouldy, extremely mouldy.
Well, look,
Not
that's
saying the
terrifying.
lounge room ones aren't, but yeah.
Because, look, the often quoted statistic is 80 to 90% of our time is spent indoors in the home. And if you work out the percentage of time spent sleeping, well, a good part of the time spent in the home is in the bedroom. So if you're saying that the bedroom units universally tend to show significant mold problems, well, no wonder people are having problems with adult onset asthma, allergy, respiratory disorders, skin infections, and that sort of thing. But look, I'll leave the sort of diagnosis to the medical professionals, but certainly from our perspective, myself as an environmental health professional, I'm all about informing the public about public health issues, and air conditioning and heating is one of them. And it sounds like your method is the number one approach that responsible authorities like property managers and real estate agents and landlords should be aware of, that they need to maintain their fittings and fixtures and not just leave it up to the tenant on an exit clean to say, yes, we've done steam cleaning of the carpets and the kitchen and oven and range hood are clean, but what about the air conditioning? So what have you found feedback from this from estate agents?
Look, honestly, I haven't had a lot of real estate agents engage my services. They're a tough crowd to get into. Sure, there are a few that are aware that air conditioners need a full internal clean, but the majority of them don't think. I don't know why. It's just a lack of knowledge, obviously, and they, like you're saying, on an exit clean, they usually get someone just to wash the filters and give it a wipe over, and that's all they think is needed. But unfortunately, it's not. They're more focused on cleaning the carpets, like you're saying, the ovens and whatnot, where these things I don't know, in my own opinion, they can't really pose an immediate threat, whereas breathing in black mold spores directly from an air conditioner, it's not, I mean, people can have reactions from mold just in a bathroom or in a ceiling void or in a basement, but this stuff in the air conditioner, it's actually the spores are being blown out into the air directly, and you're just breathing that in the whole time the air conditioner's on. And yeah, that's just the main point I've got to get across to people. And
not just that this issue of settled spores, those spores are going to settle out. I guess the analogy, it's a little bit like ping pong balls being blown around. And eventually those ping pong balls are going to settle out onto flat surfaces and build up over time. And certainly that will be a contributor to the dust component that we see on the tops of mirrors and pictures on walls and on top of door frames and that sort of thing. So you've raised a whole lot of really valid points there. Can I ask you, is it expensive to carry out this process?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, in the industry, there's different prices. People have different prices for their services. My price is $165, and that usually takes around $165, and that usually takes around 60 to 90 minutes to do a full internal clean. And I'm quite thorough. I've got a bit of an OCD problem with cleaning at home and at work, so it kind of fits in with the job I do. I mean, in business, a lot of businesses are focusing on how many air conditioners they can do, how quickly they can do them, to how much money they can make in a day. I'm not focused on that. Yes, to earn the money is good, but my focus is, my customer's health. I'll take the time required to do the job properly the first time, and I take a lot of pride in that. And I care a lot about people's health. I don't just want to do a quick job and then leave it. As I mentioned, I take up to 60 or 90 minutes, but sometimes I've taken 2.5 to 3 hours to thoroughly clean an air conditioner. And I think what's time-consuming is scrubbing. You need to physically disrupt mold spores to break them up and break them off the service to get to the bottom of them and clean them, not just spray them with the product and hose it out and leave it, you know. So I spend half of my time getting into all the crevices and grooves and all the bits and pieces of the air conditioner that where the mold's going to be hiding, and I physically hand scrub it.
Well, Brian, I suspect that certainly after today, your services are going to be on the increase, certainly from professional property managers and landlords that want to do the right thing by the occupants of their buildings. And it certainly sounds like a bargain at $165 per unit. And it certainly raises the interesting point as well about public housing as well that uses large numbers of wall-mounted inverters for their heating and cooling tasks, and certainly in aged care and disability services as well. There are hundreds of thousands of properties all over Australia used for these purposes, and I suspect that they're possibly not getting the attention that they rightly deserve.
I would agree with you on that, and I believe, especially in disabled settings or the elderly or even in childcare centres, you know, people, especially the elderly, they don't have immune systems as strong as everyone else, you know, and I've done a bit of research and reading on young children, especially newborn babies and toddlers. Their immune systems are only growing from exposure to germs and everything in the environment, so their immune systems usually aren't fully developed and strong enough to be able to handle what an adult, you know, what an average healthy adult could handle with breathing in mold spores and whatnot. And in saying that, I'm not saying it's good to be breathing it in, but yeah, they can, if they breathe it in, their immune system can handle it a lot better than the elderly or the young ones.
Brian, that's absolutely fascinating. Look, I'm going to wrap this up, but I wanted to end with a question. Do you have any final tips for consumers who might be renting or buying homes with split systems?
Yes. So as I mentioned, if you've bought a home or you're moving into a rental property and it's got used air conditioners, get it inspected first before you want to use them. In between major cleans, so it is recommended every 12 months to get a professional full internal clean of your air conditioners to remove all the contamination. I've actually got some customers that use theirs 24/7, and I need to revisit their air conditioners every 6 months because they use it so often. But in between these major cleans, you can pop out the air filters. They're fairly easy to do. Give them a good clean up. I usually would say soak them in some mild, warm, soapy water for 20 to 30 minutes. Take them outside. Give them a hose off to remove any physical debris off them. Also, another tip is most air conditioners have a fan mode. So after you've used it on cooling mode for a period of time during the day, you can switch it on to fan mode, and because that's not using any heat transfer process. It's simply the fan. And if you run that for 30 minutes after you've used it for quite a while, that will dry up most of the condensation inside the unit. Therefore, it will help prevent, the mold from growing back so quickly.
They're an excellent set of tips. And as I said at the outset, you're obviously an expert at this. How is the best way people can find you?
So I've got a website. It's organicacc.com.au. And I've got very detailed information about the products I use, what's involved in the service, the pricing, everything there. I've got a few photos on my website, but not as much as I do on my Facebook. So that's facebook.com/organic aircon cleaning. I've got hundreds and hundreds of before and after photos. I've got videos that you can look at and you get a full scope of the service that I provide. I do have Instagram, but I don't have a lot of information on there. So if anyone wants to find it, check Facebook or my Facebook page. Or anyone's got any questions, feel free to call me on 0466 216 850.
Brian, thank you very much for your time. You're doing a great service in Queensland, and I'll look forward to presenting this interview as part of my live stream later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time, Cameron. It was a pleasure.
All right. I found that absolutely fascinating. I think that this whole topic of mold and air handling systems, it's been extensively covered in the literature. And really, there's a plethora of papers out there that talk about the range of different fungi that have been found all throughout these air handling systems. In the blower wheels, the cooling coil fins, the insulation, the ductwork. These publications talk about the importance of removing this biological debris and what sampling methods should be used and what should be quantified by the lab. And services like mine can certainly help identify whether mold contaminated air handling units are in fact a problem at your home, office, or facility. And services like Brian's should be your first point of contact for advice or for on-site remediation, because at the end of the day, something is going to need to happen to these units. There are hundreds of thousands of these across Australia, and these lists of microorganisms that have been cultured or sampled within air handling systems, you can't get away from this. This is factually correct information regarding the incidence of microorganisms on surfaces in air handling systems. So you've heard from me, you've heard from Brian. Indoor air quality is a really serious matter, and the way in which you approach the cleaning task is really important as well. It's not satisfactory just to clean the accessible surfaces that you can get to with your hands. And sometimes, for a very reasonable cost outlay, you need to get in a professional. So that's really where I'd like to leave this live stream today. Thanks for watching. I encourage you to give this video a like, share it, put it into your own feed, post it to groups that you think might benefit from hearing this expert talk about practical solutions to indoor air quality. And with summer on the way, this is a really topical point. Anyway, thanks for watching. Next week, I'll be covering another topic to do with indoor air quality and mold and how we can minimize its adverse health impacts for better living. Bye for now.